Video games. The ultimate art form. Video games have become such an integral part of society that most of us grow up playing games and continue playing them, carrying our passion all the way into adulthood and even parenthood. And I'm 100% certain that by the time millennials start retiring, there'll be so many pensioners still grinding that they might even get their own esports league. As someone that grew up in the 90s, it really feels like I grew up in this magical time filled with innovation. Whether it's the N64 and the PlayStation bringing 3D to home consoles, or Doom and Quake defining the first-person genre and pretty much changing how every video game has been made ever since. But despite all the magic, there is one big thing I remember from my childhood that's incredibly relevant to today's video. Everyone dreamt of being a game developer, but nobody ever managed to do it. Why? Well, there were no game dev courses or degrees, no YouTube, no ChatGPT, and most people didn't grow up with a computer, let alone the internet, which back then, even if you could get online, was like watching a 10-minute slideshow every time you loaded a web page.
Welcome.
Well, I'm happy to say that today, anyone with a computer and the burning desire to make a game can make the dream of being a game developer a reality. And that's why this video is called How to Make a Game. So, despite the wealth of human knowledge being at your fingertips, the reason I'm making this video is because nowadays, the process of learning how to make games can be a little overwhelming. Whether it's choosing an engine or what tools to use, there are just so many choices that it can be difficult to know where to start. So hopefully, I'm going to make that process just a little simpler for you guys by first breaking down everything you need to work on to be able to make games and hopefully make them well. And then I'm also going to narrow down your choices to some great options that are particularly beginner friendly but still completely legit for making top-notch games. Let's get started. So we're going to start by first breaking down everything you need to learn into specific categories. First up, engines. You need to choose one, and you need to learn it and learn it well. Asset creation tools. For this, you're probably going to need to learn a couple. You're going to need to learn how to avoid tutorial hell because that is one of the most common concerns of anyone who starts learning games. And of course, you're going to need to learn game design tools. You're going to need to know how to learn and get better at game design. You need to learn about the entire process from design to implementation to iteration and obviously finally completion. You're going to need to know what to avoid in general. And of course, the most underrated thing, you're going to need to learn how to get good. So now we've gone through all of the things you need to focus on. You could, of course, just go ahead and start Googling, but let's jump into each of these topics in a little more detail. So, engine choice. For this, I'm trying to keep things very simple so that this video is approachable to anyone. So bearing that in mind, the first thing you need to do is decide whether you're interested in making 2D games or 3D games. Of course, you can learn both, but lots of people are much more passionate about one than the other, and it's very important to pick where to start because engines are just tools, and you need to choose the right tool for the job. If you want to make 2D games, I would start with GameMaker. If you want to learn how to make 3D games, start with Godot. And this topic is a little more out of scope for this video to go into in detail, but you should know ahead of time. If you want to make ultra realistic games, then I would just dive straight into Unreal. It's way ahead in this regard, and many other engines are going to either be impossible to accomplish this goal or just way more complicated than it needs to be. So with that out of the way, let's talk more about Godot and GameMaker because I'm sure most people are looking to make something 2D or 3D, perhaps in the style of the favorite indie game. So, why these engines in particular? Well, both of these engines are really beginner friendly, have great documentation, and lots of YouTube tutorials. They're also completely free to just start making games and releasing them. For GameMaker, you will have to pay a license if you want to sell your games commercially, which, by the way, I don't recommend in the beginning. But when you're ready to do that, it's literally just a one-off $100 fee to be able to sell PC games. If you want to make console games, it's going to cost you a monthly or yearly subscription, which is expensive, and I only recommend paying that if you're already making money from your games. GameMaker is the single best engine I've ever used for making 2D sprite-based games. If that's all you're interested in, there are no better options really. Most engines are sort of trying to do everything, and all of those extra features are probably just going to confuse things. But GameMaker is absolutely garbage for 3D. It's technically possible, but it's way harder to make 3D games in GameMaker than it is in basically any other engine. Godot, on the other hand, is an amazing choice for making 3D games because it's completely free and open source and is just as good of an engine as GameMaker, if not better in some ways. And it's still more approachable and easy to use compared to a lot of engines out there. Both of these engines are very beginner friendly and are more intuitive than most of the competition, but they aren't inherently beginner engines. They're legit. People make big successful games that are respected in both. So don't think that you're limiting yourself by learning these engines, because you're not. And once you've learned one engine, you should be very capable of learning another one. We need to talk briefly about programming languages. This video isn't going to be getting into the weeds of programming, but there is one thing you really need to know when it comes to choosing an engine, which is that it's very common for engines to push you towards one language or another. And you need to know that both Godot and GameMaker have their own bespoke programming languages, and I do think they are both a decent place to start with programming for game dev. However, GML, the GameMaker language, is more C flavored than GDScript, which means it's just more like C or C++, and therefore most languages that are based on that, which is most languages. And GDScript is more Python flavored really, because it has Python style indentation, which means it's going to matter where you've pressed tab and indented your code, which means that instead of using little curly braces to nest code, it just does it on the indentation alone, which I think is a little confusing as a place to start, and it is less transferable between other languages in general. However, it's still great for making games in Godot. It's just worth noting, I think, that in my opinion, it's probably going to be a little easier to learn other languages after starting with GML than it is with GDScript. And regardless of which you start with, if you want to learn other programming languages in the future, you definitely should try and get started learning C or C++ or whatever language you want really, although I would recommend C. But the most important thing is, if you're really set on being a programmer and getting good at that, you can start with GDScript or GML, but you need to get started with other stuff as soon as possible before you get too set in your ways. But obviously you don't have to do that. If all you care about is making games and just getting it done, you can stick with whatever engine of choice for a long time, forever really, along with whatever language it wants you to use. That is completely fine. All right, let's move on to asset creation. For pixel art, I don't know a single pixel artist that doesn't recommend Aseprite these days. It's basically just an image editor that is purpose-made for creating pixel art. It's extremely affordable, and it can even be compiled for free from source. For 3D, I recommend using Blender. Lots of tools get used for making 3D models in video games, but Blender is extremely widely used and is also completely free. You're also going to need to learn to use something like GIMP or Photoshop. GIMP is, of course, the free equivalent to Photoshop. It's way less sophisticated, but I haven't used Photoshop since high school. I've been using GIMP the entire time, and it is great. It's worth noting that if you don't want to pay for Aseprite and you're not technically minded enough to compile Aseprite, you can just make pixel art in GIMP, no problem. But bottom line is, regardless of whether you use Aseprite or Blender, you're going to need to use something like GIMP at some point, because there's always some sort of additional graphics to make, whether it's for UI or just like a Steam banner or something. And knowing GIMP or Photoshop is going to be essential, because something purpose made for pixel art isn't necessarily great for everything else. So now let's briefly talk about how to avoid tutorial hell. This is going to be one of the most common questions, so I'm going to get ahead of it. I'm also trying to keep it short here because we've got so much to cover in this video, and this is the second time recording it, and it was over an hour long, and I spent ages recording it and still missed stuff. So I'm trying to just get to the point. The key to avoiding tutorial hell is to start doing real projects. And most importantly, finish them and move on and do another and finish that. This is why it's important to get into the habit of just doing small projects that you're not planning to be your magnum opus. Just come up with something small and easy you can finish. Don't be delusional about thinking you're going to be Hideo Kojima on your first attempt. The key to avoiding tutorial hell is real experience, and you can rely on tutorials the entire time. But if you just do project after project finishing the game, you can repeat it until eventually you don't need a tutorial to start or finish a project. And that will eventually get you out of that rut. If you want some tips about how to accomplish this, if that sounds too intimidating or you can't think of lots of different game ideas, that's what game jams are for. So do a game jam. You could also just remake an existing game or just take a really old retro game idea and just add a little twist. The most important thing to get out of tutorial hell is to get invested in real projects. We're going to be learning practically, and it's going to break that cycle. So let's start talking about game design. There is a reason why I'm separating this as its own topic. In tech in general, it's very common for design and development to be completely separate things with completely separate teams. But in the game world, for whatever reason, we tend to just roll it all into one. And that is very dangerous for people learning how to make games because they think that game design is somehow or another just the same skill set. It is not. There are people that only do game design, obviously. The more technically proficient that you get, the more the bottleneck is going to become your design skills. When you start learning how to make games, one of the biggest pitfalls I see all over YouTube and Twitch from people streaming game dev is that people start to become experts on making games without actually managing to ship a game or without really being very good at game design because they've done so little of it. This is because, especially if you're going to be a solo dev, for so long, the challenge is just the technical one. How do I actually physically make this a reality? How do I go from an empty project in GameMaker or whatever engine or Unity or whatever? How do I go from that to just compiling a finished product and releasing it? That becomes people's sole focus in life, and it leads to a sort of impatience where the obsession becomes just dev stuff, which I get because dev is really fun. That's the other part of it too. You're getting kind of addicted to the technical side, but you're never stopping and smelling the flowers a little bit and just be like, is this game shit? So the key to this is to stop working on your game in engine and start working on your game on paper. Things like Google Docs or Obsidian, particularly any tool where you can create almost like a wiki-like system, like Notion or something like that. I personally use Obsidian because you're going to want to be able to create lots of linked notes, pages that all link to each other, like on Wikipedia or something. Because the key to game design is starting to put onto paper, whether it's just by writing or lots of diagrams or ideally all of the above, sketches, whatever you can think of. You need to start thinking of the entire video game from start to end and getting that down onto the page. What you absolutely don't want is for the first time you've thought about the design of a feature in your game to be whilst you're making it, because that's probably going to lead to a lot of shortcuts and just sort of improv that's going to be more led by your technical ability to accomplish the task than what is actually right for the game. So I recommend dedicating days to just design, where you're sitting down in front of a document or with a pen and paper, writing down all of your ideas, and then starting to structure them and start to think of the player's experience. Now, there is a certain reality where there's always going to be things that pop up that you didn't think of when you're making the game, where the first time you have to think about it will be when you're making it. It's sort of unavoidable to some extent. If that happens, I recommend stopping and moving to it over to work on a design document, or just setting a task for another day to work on the design for that. I generally don't recommend this weird situation where you're almost going to end up falsely pressuring yourself to kind of improv a feature, but it's unavoidable. You're going to get a certain amount of it. The goal is just to dramatically reduce the amount of that sort of design work that's just kind of in the moment. The more experience you get, the less situations like this are going to appear. The more you're going to have already thought of this before you get to working on it. But in the early days, it's going to be happening constantly. There'll be something you didn't quite think of, whether it's just like how a jump feels, where a door should be, whatever. The goal with design is to have thought of everything ahead of time as much as possible and to greatly reduce the situation where you're having to kind of decide on the spot what to do because it wasn't in the design document. When it comes to how to learn game design, I think one of the big problems with this topic is that lots of gamers feel that they're already a game designer just from playing video games, but you're going to very quickly realize that you're not. One of the biggest pitfalls on this topic is going to be thinking about it in a sort of positive feedback loop. You're going to think of like, it's great in a game when X, Y, and Z happens, or things like it's great to, guide the player. It's great when the player knows what to do, for example, which could obviously lead to like lots of over tutorialization and too much hand-holdy stuff. That stuff's going to be obvious. What I would advise is start thinking about what not to do. Start thinking about all of the things that suck in video games and focus more on avoiding those than what you think is good. Because if your design and your idea is intuitive enough, it should be inherently fun anyway. And if it isn't, you need to go back to the drawing board. This is also a good place to learn some video game history. I personally think that even though it might be kind of cringe to watch for some people now, the Angry Video Game Nerd is essentially a gigantic library of what not to do in video games. For anyone that doesn't know what it is, it's just a silly comedy show on YouTube that's been going for years. But every episode is essentially about a game that sucks. You're going to get better at game design watching every single one of those and understanding what gamers don't like than you are if you just focus on what they do like. Because it's really common for video games to have like 2 shitty ideas for every good idea. And you want to sort of avoid that early. All right, now let's briefly touch on the process. This is just going to be a quick summary, but it's worth knowing that generally the way games are made is that you start with design, sit down with a pen and paper or in front of a document or in Obsidian or whatever. Think of every idea, no matter how big or small, that you want to happen in this game and try and write it out from start to finish. Then try and implement that in an engine. And once you've done that, you just need to iterate on it and iterate on it and iterate on it. Try and make the design from start to finish. Then try and think of what could be improved. Create a new version of the game that's that improved version. Play that, improve that. And you just do this until you're done, basically. It's worth noting, however, that I do recommend trying to get to a point where you're able to play the game from start to finish as soon as possible. So don't iterate too soon. Don't get too hung up if you discover something that needs to be changed. If it's a small thing, fine, but don't get hung up on iterating like lots of stuff too early, too often, so that you end up not working on the sort of mid and later game stuff. If you think something needs to be different, you could maybe just write it down, get that build done, that build finished, and then you'll have a list then of things that need to go into the next build and try and get that one finished. Because the reason this is important is oftentimes good design is relative on where the player is in space and time in their experience. Something that seems like a great idea in isolation, 20 hours into your video game, might start to feel crappy. So you need to be able to experience the whole loop. This is actually the danger of vertical slices, and actually could be a good topic for a video. Maybe that sounds like a good title, in fact. But this is the danger of vertical slices. It's much simpler to make a vertical slice that feels good and is still worthwhile, but it's very dangerous to assume that you've figured everything out when all you've got is a vertical slice. Because what happens before and after it, whether you need to build up to those mechanics that happen in there and then continue building afterwards, whether things need to sort of evolve, or if it's just a simple case of repetition where something may only be fun for a short period of time, but that same thing that's fun hours later can be like torture. There's lots of ways that a vertical slice can give you a false sense of security. A vertical slice is more important to just accomplish a level of polish that you're trying to maintain. Fuck the design aspect. It's more important to have a build where you can do everything in the game that looks like shit and is heavily unpolished and buggy that you can iterate on. That is much more important than a vertical slice because it allows you to experience the game as a whole instead of cherry picking some highlights. So we're getting to the end here, so I'm going to try and keep this brief. These next 3 sections are really important. The next one is how to get good. I'll try and keep this simple. The key to getting good at video games is to make lots of games. The biggest pothole is to only make one game. And what I mean by that is your entire approach to learning video games is based around one idea you have in your head and you don't have other projects. That is going to be a disaster and most likely will just lead to development hell. The reason you need to make lots of games is because you need to go through the whole design and development and shipping process of making games as many times as possible. This is obviously a lot easier if you choose to make small games, but you don't necessarily have to as long as you do follow through and get them finished. Although obviously you probably should make small games in order to make this happen. Famously, John Romero of Doom fame, by the time John Carmack had met John Romero, Romero had already made a game for every letter in the alphabet. And those guys had to make lots of games on a regular basis for some shareware magazine they were with at the time. Sort of like the Beatles famously performed so much before they got famous. The id Software guys kind of did the same thing. And that's what you need to try and replicate as well. The reason it's so important, just to clarify in case it's not obvious, is you can think you are hot shit and have really nailed video games when you've only made half a game or a third of a game or 25% of a game or 10% of a game. It's similar to the vertical slice thing. Video games are experiential, right? It's not just a painting to look at. You both do it and it happens to you. It's an experience. Also, just from a technical perspective as well, you'll never know for sure how many bugs you have to fix or how good all your systems are and how reliable they are until you actually finish the game. Some complications in development don't happen until you're way in there. Not to mention the fact that just finishing stuff means there has to be a cut-off point. You have to stop, keep adding and tweaking and just get things done. I promise you, there is not anybody that has really done shit in this industry that won't tell you that the most important thing is to just get things done. There's too much talking, there's too much polishing little pieces of things to show them off, and not enough just getting it done. And oftentimes that means lots of compromise. It may mean a decent amount of crunch, regardless of how generous you are to yourself and how kind you are to yourself. It's something we all want to avoid, but I don't think I've ever come to a deadline where I haven't had to do way more work in the last couple of days. You can't test your mettle if you can't finish stuff. So repetition. Side note, I've always wanted to do this Romero thing of making a game for every letter of the alphabet, and it's something that would obviously be good for this channel, but my only reservation is just, how do we do this for content? Because it's obviously going to be something that requires a lot of time. So yeah, that's something in my head that I might start releasing a series or something where maybe like every letter is a video and each video is a summary of each project or something like that. It's like, if all I did is run this channel, I could do that project in like a month or so, probably. Maybe more like 2 months if you factor in actually putting the videos out. But yeah, anyway, let me know in the comments what you think about that, because we're yapping now. What to avoid? It absolutely pains me to say this because I hate this phrase, but it is very true, particularly if you've never done anything in development before and you've never made any games before. Over ambition is the big thing that you need to avoid. Planning on your first game being your magnum opus and planning on it somehow being a breakout success. Having your first game be on platforms that will hold you back and overcomplicate things like consoles and stuff like that. It's okay to do big technical, ambitious projects once you know what you're doing. Although even then, I still recommend choosing something that you know you can finish. It's super common for people to like want to make a GTA or want to make an MMO. And just regardless of specifics, people think, I remember thinking like this when I started making games. I watched Indie Game the movie and was like, I'm going to make one of those games and that's going to be my big hit. Being in this mindset where you think your first and only game is going to be your sort of claim to fame and your big success and how you make it in the industry, that is the single biggest mistake. Because just like previous point on how to get good, you need to iterate. You need to make lots of games in order to get good. And also, there's definitely an element of sort of just reality and ego to this. Like, did you really think you were going to be Kojima from just like your first video game? Most people that find success in the industry make tons of games before they make something good. Now, I don't want it to sound like I'm crushing your dreams. I promise you, I am a big dreamer with lots of ambition. That's why I'm a full-time content creator with like fuck all money, basically, right? I make videos and I make video games on my own because I truly believe in what I'm doing and I'm very passionate about it. But this is just a reality. I'm at a place now where I've worked on lots and lots of games, finished lots and lots of projects, and truly feel like they were basically all bad games, which is why I'm now dedicated to being like, okay, now I know what I'm doing. This is going to be my magnum opus. All right, moving on. Let's wrap up by talking about other things you should know. This is going to be sort of like a quick fire round. Learn Git and GitHub as soon as possible. If you don't know what it is, it's fine. Just Google it. It's a way to do source control and back up your games without having to do constantly save as or whatever. And it's a way that you can step through stuff. It is a vital part of game development and any dev stuff, really. It's a fundamental thing. You can start out not doing it. I started out just saving as and having a million different projects on my computer, but inevitably that's going to fill up your hard drive. And regardless, it's noob stuff done out of source control. So the sooner you can learn that, the better. For your own good, trust me. You can start with a GitHub desktop app. It's really simple and easy to use. So just download that. It makes it easy to clone repos, to create new ones, stuff like that. There's inevitably going to be some questions about AI and stuff, so don't use AI to generate any assets. Learn to make your own by doing tutorials and stuff. There's lots of great pixel art tutorials out there, for example. However, do use AI as Google and a sort of digital teacher to teach you things and help you look things up. AI can be way more efficient than just Googling stuff when it comes to code particularly. For example, one really good way to use AI as a beginner is to literally just copy one line of code, paste it into ChatGPT and ask it, what does this code do? If you don't understand the code, you can just do this line by line and it will do a very good breakdown of what it does. Likewise, you could just take a chunk of code that you wrote yourself, paste it in and ask it, how could this code be written more efficiently? If you use AI appropriately, it will rapidly increase the speed at which you can learn any programming language. Just make sure you also really read the official documentation too, because there's no replacement for that. And do not just have AI write all of the code for you. I promise you, it will start to break it and write shit code. Not all AI code is shit. It's just most of the time when people are heavy using AI, it's small projects or in small parts. With scale, AI just breaks stuff. So use it in isolation. But the most important thing is you're not learning if you're just using AI for everything. Unless, like I said, you use it in an educational way. So moving on, you don't have to use an engine to make a game, but you definitely should use an engine if you're new to making games, or even if you only have 1 or 2 games under your belt. The idea of having to use an engine is 100% overstated, but that doesn't help you if you're not an experienced programmer already and fundamentally understand the game development process. If you are new to game dev, you're only going to get lost if you don't start with an engine. However, if you are an experienced software engineer, you'll honestly probably be fine not using an engine, although I'd still recommend getting a couple of games under your belt with an engine because you still need to learn and iterate and go through the whole process and repeat it over and over again as many times as possible to get good at game dev. particularly if you're solo. If you're doing all the design, all the art as well, you need to practice that stuff too. You're just going to get less reps in if you're making an engine. But regardless, doing stuff without an engine is another topic for a video. I just know it's going to come up because I'm not using an engine for my game. All right, I think that was pretty much everything I wanted to cover. Hopefully this video is not too long. This recording is coming up on being an hour long, but I think I covered twice as much stuff as I did the last time I recorded an hour worth of footage. So hopefully this video turns out good. This video was obviously aimed more at beginners, but I do want this channel to appeal to everyone, including beginners, but also people with more experience. So maybe I'll try and make the next video about something a little more complex. I'm not really sure yet. Let me know what you guys want in the comments. Do you have a specific question, whether it's something that you already know the answer to, or whether it's something that you don't know the answer to? Do you just want to hear my take on a specific topic, or would you like me to make a video where I just do more of a think piece, a discussion on a specific topic, or just like more of a guide, whatever? Just let me know what you think. I'm still figuring out dev content. Until then, probably time to get back to working on your game, learning game dev. You definitely can end up wasting lots of time on YouTube, so probably time to close this video. Oh, sub to the channel. We need 1,000 subs in order to be able to monetize the channel, and we're really far away from that because this is a brand new channel, so it's really important right now. Oh, and considering we're not able to monetize yet, if you would like to help out and support this content, I guess you could do so at owlface.games/donate, where you'll find a link to buy me tea, not coffee, because I don't drink caffeine. Or you can do the GitHub sponsors button on there. Right, that's it. Bye.